The day my grandson Tyler called me out of touch, I felt like I'd been slapped across the face. We were having Sunday dinner at my daughter Jennifer's house in Hartford, the same house where I'd helped them with the down payment 5 years ago. Tyler was 16 then, all long limbs and restless energy, his eyes permanently glued to that phone of his. When I asked him to put it away at the dinner table, he rolled his eyes dramatically. "Grandma," he said with that particular teenage sigh that somehow stretches into a full paragraph of exasperation, "nobody cares about that old-fashioned stuff anymore. You're so out of touch." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jennifer didn't even look up from her plate. My son-in-law, Mark, just cleared his throat and mumbled something about kids these days. But I sat there, fork suspended midair, thinking about how I'd marched on Washington, how I'd chain-smoked through graduate school while writing papers that would later be published, how I'd raised a daughter alone after my husband died when she was only 12. I'd lived through assassinations and moonwalks and revolutions. I'd seen the world transform itself over and over. And now I was out of touch because I thought a family dinner deserved actual conversation. I guess I should introduce myself properly. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, though everyone has called me Ellie since before I can remember. I'm 73 years old, a retired history professor with silver hair I've never bothered to dye, and enough laugh lines to map my journey through this world. I live alone in a comfortable condo in Glastonbury, Connecticut, just 15 minutes from Jennifer's family. My late husband, Thomas, was a civil rights attorney whose heart gave out much too soon, leaving me to finish raising our daughter and navigate the terrain of midlife alone. After Tyler's out-of-touch comment, I found myself withdrawing a bit. I still attended the Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, still remembered birthdays and school events, but something had shifted. I watched more carefully, listened more intently, and spoke less frequently. I observed how Jennifer deferred to her husband on financial decisions, despite earning more than him at her marketing firm. I noticed how Tyler and his 13-year-old sister Lily barely looked up from their devices, even as their parents tried half-heartedly to engage them. The Mitchell family had been my anchor after Thomas died, the reason I got up each morning and pushed through the fog of grief. I'd been determined to give Jennifer stability, to show her that women could be strong and independent, that we could rebuild after devastating loss. I worked my way up from community college instructor to university professor, published 3 books on women's movements in 20th century America, and still managed to attend every soccer game and dance recital. When Jennifer married Mark Wright, after college, I kept my reservations to myself. When they struggled to make ends meet in their early years together, I quietly helped with bills without making them feel indebted. Jennifer had been a bright, curious child who asked endless questions about everything from dinosaurs to democracy. The day she was accepted to Columbia, I cried with pride. But somewhere along the way, that curiosity dimmed. She took a safe job rather than the risky creative position she'd dreamed about. She stopped reading the books we used to discuss. She seemed content to drift along in the current of suburban life, never rocking the boat. And perhaps I was partly to blame. In my determination to give her security after her father died, maybe I'd emphasized stability too much. Maybe I'd made her afraid of taking chances. These thoughts kept me awake some nights as I wondered if, in trying to be both mother and father, to her, I'd somehow failed at both. 3 months after the out-of-touch incident, my phone rang on a Wednesday evening. I was curled up with a biography of Betty Friedan, a cup of chamomile tea cooling on the side table. "Mom?" Jennifer's voice had that stretched thin quality it got when she was overwhelmed. "I hate to ask this, but we're in a bind. Mark's got a business dinner. I've got a client presentation I can't reschedule, and Tyler has this massive history project due Friday that he's barely started. He needs to interview someone who lived through the 1960s, and he's panicking. Could you possibly come over tomorrow after school and help him?" I know it's last minute. I felt a flicker of something. Not quite satisfaction, but perhaps vindication. The 1960s? Well, I suppose I might know a thing or two about that decade. Jennifer missed my dry tone entirely. Oh, Mom, you're a lifesaver. We'll owe you dinner next time. The next afternoon, I arrived at Jennifer's house with a canvas tote bag containing a few items from my personal archives. Tyler opened the door, his face a picture of teenage misery. "Hey, Grandma," he mumbled, already turning away and trudging toward the kitchen. I followed, taking in the immaculate countertops and designer appliances that Jennifer was so proud of. Tyler flopped into a chair at the island, his history textbook open beside a laptop. "So," I said, setting down my bag, "your mom tells me you need to interview someone about the 1960s. He nodded without looking up. "It's 20% of my grade, and Mr. Kendrick is super strict about deadlines." "What specifically about the 60s? He sighed dramatically. "We're supposed to get first-hand accounts of either the Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam War protests, or the Women's Liberation Movement. Everyone else interviewed their grandparents weeks ago." I pulled up a stool across from him. "And you left it until 2 days before because—" He finally met my eyes, a flush creeping up his neck. I was going to interview Dad's Uncle Frank about Vietnam, but he had that heart scare and went to Florida to recover. Then I was trying to find someone else, but... He trailed off. "But you didn't think of your grandmother, the history professor, who specializes in social movements of the 20th century. His flush deepened. "I didn't know that's what you taught." "And whose fault is that?" I thought but didn't say. Instead, I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a small wooden box. "I was 20 years old in 1968, I said, opening the box to reveal a collection of pins and badges. "I was a junior at Berkeley. That was the year Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy were assassinated. The year protesters disrupted the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. The year Richard Nixon was elected president." I watched as Tyler's eyes widened slightly, his posture straightening. "You were at Berkeley? During all the protests? And stuff?" "I wasn't just at Berkeley during the protests," I said, selecting a pin that read, "Women Strike for Peace," and placing it on the counter between us. I was in the protests. For the first time, perhaps, since he'd entered adolescence. My grandson looked at me, really looked at me, with something like interest. "I have 2 hours, I said, checking my watch. "Shall we get started?" What began as a reluctant interview transformed into something I couldn't have anticipated. I told Tyler about arriving at Berkeley in 1966, a sheltered girl from a Connecticut suburb whose worldview exploded upon contact with the politically charged campus. I described the teach-ins against the Vietnam War, the days when I'd cut class to join marches, the night I was nearly arrested when a peaceful demonstration turned chaotic after police arrived. I showed him photographs, me with a group of friends, arms linked in front of Sproul Hall, Thomas and me at a folk music festival, his arm draped casually over my shoulder, a newspaper clipping about women burning their draft cards in solidarity with male students facing conscription. "Wait," Tyler interrupted, picking up the yellowed newspaper. "You burned your draft card? But women didn't get drafted." "That's right," I said. "We couldn't be drafted, vote, or even open a bank account without a husband or father's signature. But we could stand with our brothers and boyfriends and fellow students. We could put our bodies on the line for what we believed in." I told him about the fear that permeated everything. Fear of being sent to Vietnam, fear of nuclear war, fear of being on the wrong side of history. I told him about the exhilaration of finding my voice among thousands of others, about dancing in Golden Gate Park during the summer of love with flowers in my hair, about weeping openly in a dormitory lounge when King was shot. "Your grandfather was there for most of it," I said, showing him a photo of Thomas addressing a crowd, microphone in hand. "That's where we met, at an anti-war rally. He was already in law school, helping students who'd been arrested understand their rights. I thought he was the most brilliant person I'd ever met. Tyler was silent for a moment, studying the photo. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "He looks like Dad a little," he finally said. "Yes," I agreed. Though in truth, Mark had always struck me as Thomas's opposite. Cautious where Thomas had been bold, conventional where Thomas had questioned everything. They have the same jawline. As I shared more stories about attending consciousness-raising groups where women gathered in living rooms to discover they weren't alone in their experiences, about the first time I heard Gloria Steinem speak, about staying up all night mimeographing leaflets for a demonstration, I watched Tyler's perception of me visibly shift. His questions became more thoughtful, less perfunctory. He began taking notes without prompting. "So this stuff with Black Lives Matter and the Women's March," he said at one point. "It's kind of like what was happening back then." "History doesn't repeat itself," I told him, "but it often rhymes. Different circumstances, similar human responses." By the time Jennifer came home, flustered and apologizing for being late, Tyler and I had filled several pages with notes and outlined his entire paper. We'd even recorded a short video interview on his phone that he could edit for the presentation portion of his assignment. "Did you get what you needed?" Jennifer asked, setting down her briefcase and kicking off her heels. Tyler nodded, gathering his materials. "Grandma was at Berkeley during all the big protests. She met Grandpa at an anti-war rally. She even got tear-gassed once." Jennifer blinked, looking from her son to me. "Mom, you never told me about being tear-gassed." I shrugged. There are a lot of stories I haven't told. Then, turning to Tyler, "You have my number. Call if you have any more questions while you're writing." He nodded again, and as I gathered my things to leave, he said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Thanks, Grandma. This was actually pretty cool." On my drive home, I thought about all the parts of myself I'd packed away over the years. The young woman who'd argued passionately about politics over cheap wine in student apartments. The new mother who'd brought baby Jennifer to faculty meetings because I refused to choose between my child and my career. The widow who'd channeled grief into writing my first book. Somewhere along the way, I'd become reduced in my family's eyes to simply Grandma, a provider of birthday checks and holiday meals, a babysitter in emergencies, but not a full person with a rich interior life and history of her own. 2. Days later, Tyler called to tell me he'd gotten an A on his project. His teacher had been especially impressed by the primary sources, my pins and photographs, and the personal connection to the material. "Mr. Kendrick wants to know if you'd come speak to our class sometime," he said, an undercurrent of pride in his voice that warmed me from the inside out. "I'd be happy to," I replied. That weekend at Sunday dinner, something had shifted. Tyler asked me about my latest book club selection. Lily wanted to know if I'd really worn bell-bottoms and listened to the Beatles. Even Mark engaged me in a conversation about how protest tactics had evolved over the decades. As we were clearing the dishes, Jennifer bumped her hip against mine gently, a gesture of affection she'd used since childhood. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said quietly. "For what?" "For forgetting who you are, who you've been." She kept her eyes on the plate she was rinsing. "Watching Tyler discover you as a person, not just as a grandmother. It made me realize I've been doing the same thing, taking you for granted." I squeezed her shoulder. "It happens. We get busy. We forget to really see the people closest to us." "No." She shook her head firmly. "It's more than that, I think. I think I've been trying so hard to have a different life than yours. A more conventional life. Maybe I was afraid of not measuring up." This confession knocked the wind out of me. Not measuring up? Jennifer, everything I ever did was to give you options, not to set a standard you had to meet. I know that here, she tapped her temple. But not here. She placed her hand over her heart. Over the following weeks, small changes unfolded. Tyler asked me to help him start a social justice club at his high school. Jennifer began joining me for morning walks, using the time to ask questions about my life that she'd never thought to ask before. Mark found a documentary series about the 1960s, and we all watched it together, with me filling in personal context during the commercial breaks. But the most profound change came from within me. I'd been holding back, I realized, censoring myself, softening my opinions, keeping quiet to avoid rocking the boat. In trying to be the supportive mother and helpful grandmother, I'd muted the very qualities that had defined my youth: my passion, my outspokenness, my willingness to challenge convention. 6 months after Tyler's history project, Jennifer came to me with news. She'd been offered a position as creative director at a smaller agency, the kind of risk-taking role she'd once dreamed about but had been too afraid to pursue. It's less money, more hours, and completely terrifies me, she admitted. Mark thinks I should stay where I am. Security, you know? I studied my daughter's face, so like Thomas's when he was wrestling with a difficult case. What do you want? I want. She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. I want to feel alive again, challenged, like I'm creating something meaningful. I smiled, recognizing the echo of my younger self in her words. Then you already know what to do. She took the job. The adjustment wasn't easy. There were tense discussions about finances, rearrangements of household responsibilities, evenings when she came home drained but exhilarated. Yet, I watched her come alive again, saw the spark return to her eyes that had been missing for so long. One evening, about a year after Tyler's history project, Jennifer invited me over for a special dinner, just the two of us. The kids were at friends' houses and Mark was traveling for work. I found these in the attic, she said, bringing out a dusty box I recognized immediately. It contained my journals from the years right after Thomas died. Raw, honest accounts of my grief, my fears, my determination to create a good life for Jennifer despite our loss. I never knew, she said softly, touching the worn cover of one journal. I never understood what it cost you to be so strong for me. I reached across the table for her hand. It wasn't a cost. It was a choice. Every day I chose you. Chose us. I've been thinking about what you told Tyler, she continued, about putting your body on the line for what you believed in. For years, I think I've been too afraid to really stand for anything. At work, in my marriage, even as a parent. I've been going along to get along. And now? A slow smile spread across her face. Thomas's smile, full of determination. And a touch of mischief. Now, I'm ready to make some noise. The following week, she persuaded Mark to attend couples therapy, something she'd suggested for years that he'd always dismissed. She spoke up at a school board meeting about the outdated curriculum. She even joined me at a climate march, bringing Tyler and Lily along. As for me, I started teaching a community course on social movements at the local library. I reconnected with old friends from my activist days. I began writing again. Not academic work this time, but a memoir about coming of age during one of America's most turbulent decades. Tyler, my out-of-touch accuser turned unlikely ally, became my most enthusiastic supporter. He helped me set up social media accounts to promote my library course. He interviewed me on his school's podcast about intergenerational activism. And perhaps most meaningfully, he started bringing friends over to my condo for what they called wisdom sessions, informal conversations where I shared experiences from my past that somehow helped them navigate their present. During one such session, as a group of teenagers sprawled across my living room furniture earnestly discussing prison reform, Tyler caught my eye and grinned. What? I asked during a lull in the conversation. Nothing, he said, but his smile widened. Just thinking about how I used to think you were out of touch. Turns out you were just ahead of your time. That night, after the last teenager had left and I was tidying up the empty glasses and plate of cookie crumbs, I found myself humming a protest song from my Berkeley days. I caught my reflection in the window. Silver-haired, lined face, eyes, bright with purpose, and felt a surge of gratitude for Tyler's history assignment. It had done more than reconnect me with my grandson. It had reconnected me with myself. When people ask me now about the secret to bridging generational divides, I tell them it's simple. Remember that every older person was once young and radical in their own way. Remember that every young person will someday look back on this moment as their history. And most importantly, remember that nobody, not your parents, not your children, not your grandchildren, ever really knows your full story unless you share it. So share it. All of it. The marches and the tear gas, the victories and the heartbreaks, the times you stood tall and the times you stumbled. Because your history isn't just yours. It's a thread in the tapestry of our collective journey, a lesson for those still finding their way, a reminder that progress has never come easily, but always comes eventually to those willing to stand up and be counted. Tyler is in college now, majoring in political science with a minor in environmental studies. Jennifer is thriving in her creative role and recently started mentoring young women in marketing. Mark, to everyone's surprise, including his own, has become involved in local politics, running for city council on a progressive platform. Lily, now 16, started a feminist club at her high school and asked me to be their faculty advisor. As for me, my memoir will be published next spring. The title? Out of Touch, a radical grandmother's journey from Berkeley to the suburbs and back again. Tyler helped me come up with it. He says irony sells. Last Sunday, as we all gathered for dinner, a tradition that has become richer, more honest, more alive. I looked around the table at my family engaged in a spirited debate about healthcare policy. Jennifer was challenging Mark's points with well-researched counter-arguments. Lily was filming parts of the discussion for a school project. Tyler was playing devil's advocate, testing the strength of everyone's positions. And I sat there. No longer the silent observer, but a full participant, thinking about how sometimes we need to be reminded of who we were to remember who we are. Sometimes we need someone to see past the roles we play, mother, grandmother, provider, supporter, to recognize the complex, flawed, passionate humans beneath those labels. Sometimes, as I learned from Tyler's innocent but cutting remark, we need to be called out of touch to find our way back to our most authentic selves. What I didn't tell Tyler during our initial conversation about the 1960s was the depth of my involvement in the movement. There were parts of my history I had carefully tucked away, not just from my grandson but from Jennifer as well. Memories that felt too raw, too personal to share casually over kitchen counter interviews. But as winter melted into spring and Tyler's interest in my past grew more genuine, I found myself gradually opening doors I'd kept locked for decades. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Tyler texted asking if he could stop by after school. Working on a follow-up project, his message read. Need more info about women's lib movement. I smiled at the abbreviation, so modern and yet so fitting for how we'd referred to it back then, before feminism became the preferred term. I texted back my agreement and spent the morning pulling out more memorabilia from my storage closet, including journals I hadn't opened since Jennifer was small. When Tyler arrived, shaking raindrops from his jacket in my entryway, I had spread several items across my coffee table. Dog-eared copies of The Feminine Mystique and Sexual Politics, a stack of hand-printed zines from Consciousness Raising, groups and photographs from women's marches where I'd carried signs demanding equal pay and reproductive rights. Wow, Tyler said, settling onto my sofa and immediately picking up one of the zines. You made these? With a group of women from my neighborhood, I explained. After Berkeley, After I'd married your grandfather and we'd moved to New Haven for his work. We'd gather in living rooms while our husbands were at the office and talk about everything we weren't supposed to discuss in polite company. Tyler. Flipped through pages covered in typewritten articles about marriage inequality, workplace discrimination, and women's health. This is pretty radical stuff, Grandma, even by today's standards. I laughed. That was the point. We were hungry for radical change. As I walked Tyler through the materials, explaining the context behind each item, I felt myself relaxing into the role of historian rather than just grandmother. This was my area of expertise, after all. For 3 decades, I'd taught young people about these very movements, analyzed their impacts, traced their evolution. But I'd always maintained a professional distance in my classroom, rarely revealing my personal involvement. Did Mom know about all this? Tyler asked, studying a photo of me with my arms linked with other women, facing a line of uncomfortable-looking police officers. Some of it, I said carefully. She was very young during the height of my activism, and later. I trailed off, not sure how to explain the complicated calculus of what mothers choose to share with their daughters. Later, our relationship was different. I was focused on giving her stability after your grandfather died. Tyler nodded, though I could tell he didn't fully understand. How could he? The choices women of my generation made, the compromises, the careful navigation between public and private selves, would seem foreign to him, raised as he was in an era of social media transparency. There's something else I want to show you, I said, reaching for a leather-bound album I'd placed on the side table, deliberately separate from the other materials. But I need you to promise me something first. Tyler looked up, curiosity piqued. What? This stays between us for now. I'll share it with your mother when the time is right, but I need to be the one to do it. He sat up straighter, intrigued by the seriousness in my voice. I promise. I handed him the album, watching as he opened it carefully. Inside were newspaper clippings, court documents, and photographs documenting a chapter of my life I'd never fully shared with my family. My arrest and trial for participating in a sit-in at a government building in 1971, protesting the continuation of the Vietnam War. The final photograph showed me standing on the courthouse steps after my acquittal, fist raised in defiance, Thomas's arm around my waist, both of us looking impossibly young and fierce. You were arrested? Tyler's voice was hushed, a mixture of shock and, was that admiration? I was, I confirmed. Along with 23 others. We blocked the entrance to a military recruitment office for 2 days. The charges were eventually dismissed. But it was intense. And Mom doesn't know about this? I sighed, feeling the weight of decades of careful omission. Your mother was only 3. Thomas and I decided it was better to shield her from it, at least until she was older. Then Thomas died when she was 12, and I became solely focused on keeping our lives stable. The right moment to share this part of my past never seemed to come. Tyler studied the documents with an expression I couldn't quite read. But you were a history professor. You literally taught about this stuff. Yes, but I hesitated, struggling to articulate the compartmentalization I'd maintained for so long. In the classroom, I could discuss these movements academically. At home with Jennifer, I was just trying to be a good mother, a stable provider. I didn't want her to worry that her only remaining parent might get arrested again or lose her job because of her political activities. Tyler was silent for a long moment, turning pages slowly, examining each document. Finally, he looked up at me. I think that's why you seem different now. Since we started talking about all this, it's like you've been 2 different people all this time, and they're finally becoming the same person again. His insight startled me. How had this teenager, this boy who had dismissed me as out of touch just months ago, seen so clearly what I'd been unable to articulate even to myself. Before I could respond, Tyler's phone chimed with a text. He glanced at it and grimaced. "It's Mom. She's wondering where I am. We're supposed to go look at colleges this weekend, and she wants me home to pack." I nodded, helping him gather his notes. "We can continue this another time." "Definitely," he said, carefully placing the leather album back in my hands. "And thanks for trusting me with this, Grandma." After Tyler left, I sat alone in my living room surrounded by the artifacts of my younger self. I picked up the courthouse photograph again, studying Thomas's face, the determined set of his jaw, the proud gleam in his eyes as he stood beside me. We had been partners in every sense of the word, equal in our commitment to justice, to each other, to creating a better world for our daughter. When had I stopped being that Eleanor? Not all at once, certainly. It had been a gradual transformation, priorities shifting after Thomas's death, energy redirected toward securing tenure, providing for Jennifer, maintaining the appearance of respectability as a single mother in academia. By the time Jennifer reached adulthood, the firebrand who'd faced down police and prosecutors had been so thoroughly buried beneath layers of maternal pragmatism that sometimes I forgot she had ever existed. I was pondering these thoughts the following Sunday as I prepared for the weekly family dinner. I'd brought a strawberry rhubarb pie, Jennifer's favorite since childhood, and was arranging it on a serving plate when I overheard voices from the living room. Tyler was speaking to Jennifer, their tones hushed but intense. "I'm just saying, Mom, there's a lot about Grandma you don't know. She's got this whole history that's actually really cool." "I know my mother's history, Tyler." Jennifer's voice carried a defensive edge I recognized all too well. "I lived with her for 18 years, remember?" "Yeah, but what?" "You spend a few afternoons with her for a school project, and suddenly you're the expert on Eleanor. Mitchell?" I froze, pie server in hand, listening as my daughter and grandson argued about me as if I were a historical figure rather than a living, breathing woman in the next room. Part of me wanted to interrupt, to defend Tyler's newfound appreciation for my past. But another part, the observer, the historian, was curious about how this conversation would unfold without my intervention. "I'm not saying I'm an expert," Tyler said, his voice taking on the careful, reasonable tone teenagers use when they're trying to sound mature. "I'm just surprised you never told us about her activism, about how she got arrested protesting the war, about—" "What?" Jennifer's interruption was sharp enough that I nearly dropped the pie server. "What are you talking about? My mother was never arrested." There was a silence, and I could imagine Tyler's expression, the realization that he'd revealed something I'd asked him to keep private. I thought you knew," he stammered. "She has newspaper clippings and court documents." "That's impossible." Jennifer's voice had dropped to almost a whisper. She would have told me something like that. I set down the pie, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and stepped into the doorway of the living room. Jennifer and Tyler both turned to look at me, their expressions a study in contrast. Hers shocked and slightly angry, his apologetic and embarrassed. "Mom?" Jennifer's voice held a question and an accusation all at once. "What is Tyler talking about?" I took a deep breath. It's true. I was arrested in 1971 for civil disobedience. Your father and I both participated in a sit-in at a military recruitment office in New Haven. Jennifer stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking in a foreign language. "Dad too? But that can't be right. You never said anything." "You were very young," I said, moving fully into the room now. "And after your father died, it seemed complicated. I was trying so hard to give you stability, to be the perfect mother." "Perfect?" Jennifer let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You think hiding your past from me was being perfect?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "I'm gonna go help Dad with the grill," he muttered, making a hasty exit through the patio doors. Once we were alone, Jennifer crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive posture she'd adopted since childhood whenever she felt vulnerable. "Were you ever going to tell me?" I sank into an armchair, suddenly feeling every one of my 73 years. "I don't know," I admitted. I thought about it many times over the years, but the longer I waited, the harder it seemed to bring up. So if Tyler hadn't blurted it out, I might never have known. "What else haven't you told me, Mom? What other parts of your life, of my father's life, have you kept hidden?" The hurt in her voice cut deep. I had always prided myself on my honesty, my direct approach to life's challenges. Yet here was evidence of a profound failure of transparency with the person who mattered most. "Jennifer, please try to understand. After your father died, I was terrified of losing you too, physically, emotionally, in any way. I thought if you knew about my more radical past, you might worry about my stability or my judgment. I was a single mother in academia at a time when that was still viewed with suspicion. I couldn't afford to be seen as controversial." "So you just erased parts of yourself? Parts of Dad?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Don't you think I deserved to know who my parents really were?" "Yes," I said simply. "You did deserve that. I made a choice I thought was protective, but maybe it was really about my own fear." Jennifer was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on a family photo on the mantel. Her wedding day, with me standing beside her in a lavender suit, smiling proudly. "All those history classes you taught," she finally said. "All those books you wrote about women finding their voices. And at home, you were." "What? Playing a role?" The accuracy of her assessment left me momentarily speechless. When I did find my voice, it emerged as little more than a whisper. I didn't see it that way at the time, but yes, I suppose I was. The glass door slid open as Mark stepped in from the patio. "Steaks are almost ready," he announced before registering. The tension in the room. "Everything okay in here?" Jennifer turned to him with a brittle smile. "Just discovering my mother's secret past as a radical activist who got arrested. The usual Sunday conversation." Mark's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously? You, Eleanor?" The wry disbelief in his tone irked me despite my emotional exhaustion. "Yes, Mark. Is that so hard to believe?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "No, I mean, you're always so proper and—" He trailed off, clearly recognizing he was not improving the situation. "Dinner's ready," Lily called from the dining room, mercifully ending the awkward exchange. Throughout the meal, I felt Jennifer's gaze on me repeatedly, studying me as if trying to reconcile the mother she thought she knew with this new information. Conversation was stilted, with Tyler making valiant attempts to fill the silence with stories from school, while Lily, oblivious to the undercurrents, chattered about her upcoming dance recital. As I drove home later that evening, I felt an odd mixture of relief and apprehension. The secret I'd carried for so long was finally out, but the hurt in Jennifer's eyes suggested that my well-intentioned deception had created a rift I wasn't sure how to repair. The next morning, I woke to a text from Jennifer. "Can we talk? Alone. Coffee at Westfield's at 10? Westfield's was a small cafe equidistant between our homes, a neutral territory. I texted back my agreement and spent the next hour trying to anticipate what Jennifer might say, how I might respond, what other questions she might have about the past I'd kept from her. When I arrived at the cafe, Jennifer was already seated at a corner table, 2 steaming mugs in front of her. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept well, but she managed a small smile as I approached. "I ordered your usual," she said as I sat down. "Americano, extra hot." "Thank you." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, grateful for something to hold on to. "I spent half the night going through old photo albums," Jennifer said without preamble. "Looking for clues I might have missed. signs of this other version of you. She took a sip of her coffee. The funny thing is, they were everywhere once I knew to look for them. The books on your shelves, the way you always insisted I question authority, even that women's strike for peace pin you wore on your winter coat. I always thought it was just vintage jewelry. I nodded, remembering how I'd worn that pin through decades of winters, a small talisman connecting me to my younger self. I never completely abandoned that part of me, I said. I just compartmentalized it. But why? After Dad died, why not tell me the whole truth about who you both were? I considered her question carefully, wanting to give her the honesty she deserved. Grief does strange things to us. When Thomas died, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I was suddenly solely responsible for you, for our financial security, for everything. The academic world was still largely a boys' club. Women who were seen as too radical, too outspoken, didn't get tenure. They didn't get research grants. They didn't advance. So you played it safe. I played it safe, I agreed. And then it became a habit, a way of being. The longer I maintained that separation between my public and private selves, the harder it became to integrate them again. Jennifer was quiet for a moment, tracing the rim of her coffee mug with one finger. You know what hurts the most? She finally said. Not that you kept secrets, but that I might never have known the real. You if Tyler hadn't stumbled onto your past, that we might have gone our whole lives with this. This wall between us that I didn't even know was there. Her words hit me with the force of physical pain. Jennifer, I have always loved you with every fiber of my being. That has never been anything but completely real. I know that, she said quickly. I've never doubted your love. But love and honesty aren't the same thing, are they? The question hung between us, unanswerable in its simplicity and its complexity. What else don't I know? Jennifer asked. About you? About Dad? I took a deep breath. Your father was offered a prestigious position at a corporate law firm, right before he died. The kind of job that would have set us up financially for life. He turned it down because the firm represented companies that manufactured weapons for the Vietnam War. He believed some principles weren't negotiable. Jennifer's eyes widened slightly. So all those years you worked extra jobs, took on summer teaching, we could have been comfortable if he'd taken that job. We could have been wealthier, I corrected gently. I don't think we would have been more comfortable living with that kind of compromise. Thomas couldn't have been the man I loved and taken that position. Why didn't you ever tell me that? I didn't want you to resent him for the financial struggles we faced after his death. I wanted you to remember him as the hero he was to me. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, processing this information. What about you? What compromises did you make that I don't know about? I smiled ruefully. Too many to count in one conversation. But here's one. I was offered the chance to work on a documentary about women's liberation in 1980. It would have meant traveling extensively for 6 months, being part of something groundbreaking. I turned it down because you were in middle school, and I couldn't bear the thought of being away from you for so long, of disrupting your life after everything you'd already been through. I never knew about that. Of course not. That was the point. I wanted you to feel that your life was stable, predictable, that you could count on me to always be there. But you sacrificed opportunities, parts of yourself, for me. I reached across the table to take her hand. Not for you, Jennifer, for us, for the life we were building together. Every choice I made, even the choice to keep certain things from you, came from love. Jennifer squeezed my hand, then released it to wipe away a tear that had escaped despite her obvious effort to maintain composure. I need time to process all this, to reconcile the mother I grew up with and this activist, this woman, who faced down police and went to court for her beliefs. Take all the time you need, I said. I'm not going anywhere, and I promise, no more secrets. As we finished our coffee, Jennifer asked more questions about the arrest, about my time at Berkeley, about her father's work with civil rights cases. I answered each one as honestly and completely as I could, watching as my daughter gradually absorbed this new understanding of her parents, her history, her own foundations. "You know," she said as we prepared to leave, "Tyler thinks you're basically a superhero now. This whole thing has given him a totally different perspective on what it means to be out of touch." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Maybe being in touch with a different era isn't the same as being out of touch. Maybe, Jennifer agreed with a small smile. Or maybe we've all been out of touch in our own ways. Me with my past, you with parts of yourself, Tyler with. She gestured vaguely. Everything that happened before YouTube was invented. That afternoon, I went home and did something I'd been contemplating for weeks. I called my editor at the university press that had published my academic books and pitched a memoir about women's activism from the 1960s to the present, weaving my personal experiences with broader historical analysis. To my surprise and delight, she was immediately enthusiastic. "Eleanor, I've been hoping you'd write something like this for years," she told me. "Your academic work is impeccable, but I've always sensed there was a more personal story you weren't telling." "There was," I admitted, "but I'm ready to tell it now." Over the next few weeks, as I began organizing materials for the memoir, I noticed subtle shifts in my relationship with Jennifer. She called more often, asking questions about my past that she'd never thought to ask before. She brought Lily over one Saturday to help me digitize old photographs, an activity that turned into an impromptu history lesson for my teenage granddaughter. "Wait, Grandma, is that you with Gloria Steinem?" Lily asked, holding up a slightly faded color photograph from a conference in the late 1970s. "Yes," I confirmed. "We were both speaking at a women's leadership symposium at Columbia." "That's so cool. Can I scan this one for my women's history project?" Jennifer caught my eye over Lily's head, her expression a mixture of wonder and something like pride. In that moment, I realized that what I had feared for so long, that revealing my full self might somehow diminish me in my daughter's eyes, had proven entirely unfounded. Instead, it had opened a door to a deeper, more authentic connection, not just with Jennifer, but with the next generation as well. The following Sunday dinner had a different energy. As we gathered around the table, Mark raised his glass in an impromptu toast to Eleanor, history professor, activist, author, and apparently the coolest grandmother in Connecticut. "Hear, hear," Tyler said with a grin, raising his water glass. I felt my cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and pleasure. "I don't know about coolest." "Definitely coolest," Lily insisted. "Paige's grandmother collects ceramic cats and thinks TikTok is a breath mint." As laughter rippled around the table, I caught Jennifer watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "What?" I asked softly, as the others launched into a debate about the relative coolness factors of various grandparents they knew. "I was just thinking," she replied, matching my quiet tone. "How much Dad would love seeing you like this. Fully yourself again." Her words brought a lump to my throat. I think he would. Later that evening, as Jennifer walked me to my car, she linked her arm through mine, a gesture so natural and yet so meaningful in its echo of how we'd walked together when she was a child, when we were all each other had. "Mom," she said as we reached my car, "I want you to know that I understand why you made the choices you did after Dad died. I might not agree with all of them, but I understand them." I turned to face her, taking in the features so like my own, the determined chin, the direct gaze. "And I want you to know that learning to be honest with you again has been the greatest gift. I feel more myself than I have in decades." "Good," she said firmly, "because that's the mother I need, the whole person, not just the parts you thought were safe to show me." As I drove home under a canopy of stars, I thought about the strange, circuitous path that had led me here. How a teenager's dismissive comment had somehow unlocked doors I'd kept sealed for decades. How the very history I'd tried to compartmentalize had become the bridge to a deeper connection with my family. And I thought about Thomas, about what he would make of all this. I could almost hear his laugh, see the wry twist of his smile as he said, "Well, it took you long enough, Ellie." In the privacy of my car, I smiled back at his memory. Better late than never, right? That night, I dreamed of Berkeley, of sunshine and protest signs and the particular electricity in the air when thousands of voices join as one. I dreamed of Thomas beside me, young and vibrant and full of righteous fire. I dreamed of Jennifer as a child, asking endless questions about the world. And when I woke, for the first time in years, the past didn't feel like a separate country I had left behind, but rather like a continuous thread weaving through the fabric of my present, making it stronger, more vivid, more completely mine. The night after Jennifer and I had our coffee shop conversation, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake until 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling of my bedroom, thinking about identities shed and reclaimed, thinking about the person I'd been at 20, at 40, at 60, and who I might yet become in whatever time remained to me. The weight of secrets lifted felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying, like stepping out onto a high wire without the safety net I'd relied on for decades. When dawn finally crept through my curtains, I made a decision. I got up, made a strong pot of coffee, and began emptying my closet. By noon, I had created 3 enormous piles: clothes to donate, clothes to keep, and clothes to discard entirely. The keep pile was startlingly small, primarily comfortable jeans, sweaters in rich jewel tones rather than the muted pastels I'd adopted in my respectable professor years, and a few beloved items from earlier eras that I'd never quite been able to part with. Standing amid the chaos, I realized I'd been dressing for a role rather than for myself. The beige slacks and sensible cardigans that dominated my donate pile weren't clothes I'd chosen out of preference, but out of a desire to project a certain image: serious academic, reliable grandmother, unthreatening widow. When had I become so concerned with being unthreatening? I spent the afternoon at thrift stores and local boutiques, purchasing items that spoke to me: a leather jacket in soft burgundy, several flowing tunics in vibrant patterns, comfortable boots made for walking rather than just for show. I even stopped at a salon on impulse and asked the young stylist to reshape my silver bob into something more modern, less matronly. Something that says, "I have opinions and I'm not afraid to share them," I told her. She grinned, running her fingers through my hair. "I know exactly what you mean. My grandmother just went through a similar transformation after her divorce. She calls it her coming back to life haircut." I liked that framing. Coming back to life. That was precisely what it felt like. A resurrection of parts of myself that had been dormant but never truly gone. When I arrived at Sunday dinner the following weekend, Lily was the first to notice. She gasped dramatically as I walked through the door, hands flying to her cheeks in a gesture so teenaged it made me smile. "Grandma, your hair, your outfit, you look amazing." Mark did a double take, nearly dropping the tray of appetizers he was carrying from the kitchen. "Wow, Eleanor, that's quite a change." Jennifer emerged from the dining room, her expression shifting from surprise to something more complex, a mixture of admiration and perhaps a touch of uncertainty. "Mom, you look wonderful. What prompted all this?" I shrugged, suddenly feeling self-conscious despite my determination to embrace this more authentic version of myself. Just felt like it was time for a change. "Well, it suits you," Jennifer said, coming forward to touch the soft edge of my new layered cut. "I've never seen you with your hair like this." "Not since the 70s, I admitted. Thomas always liked it this way. A shadow of something, regret perhaps, flickered across Jennifer's face at the mention of her father's preference. This small detail about her parents she'd never known. But she recovered quickly, linking her arm through mine. Come into the kitchen. We're trying a new recipe tonight and could use your opinion. Dinner that evening had a different energy. Tyler peppered me with questions about my work with the memoir, genuinely interested in the process. Lily wanted to know if I still had any of my protest clothes from the 60s and 70s. Even Mark, who had always maintained a certain polite distance, engaged me in a surprisingly thoughtful conversation about how activism had evolved from my era to the present. The tools have changed, I acknowledged, but the fundamental work remains the same. Identifying injustice and standing against it, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. That's what I've been trying to tell Dad about the climate protests at school, Tyler interjected. It's not just about skipping class. It's about using the power we have. Mark looked skeptical but not dismissive. Progress, from my perspective. I just want to make sure you understand the issues fully before you're out there protesting. These things are complicated. That's why I've been doing research, Tyler said, with the exaggerated patience teenagers reserve for adults they consider insufficiently enlightened. Grandma's been helping me find primary sources from earlier environmental movements. Jennifer raised an eyebrow at me. You have? Just pointing him toward reliable archives, I said. The historian in me can't resist a good research question. As we cleared the dishes later, Jennifer hung back until we were alone in the kitchen. So this new look, this renewed interest in activism, is this the real Eleanor Mitchell emerging from hibernation? I loaded plates into the dishwasher, considering my answer. Not emerging, I finally said. Reconciling. I'm trying to bring together all the different versions of myself I've been over the years. The radical and the responsible, the professor and the protester, the mother and the individual. Jennifer leaned against the counter, arms crossed. And what brought this on now, specifically? Honestly, Tyler's history project opened a door. Our conversations since then have pushed it wider, and seeing how you responded when you learned about my past, with interest rather than judgment, made me realize I've been hiding parts of myself unnecessarily. I closed the dishwasher and turned to face her directly. I've spent decades being careful. Maybe it's time to be courageous. Instead, careful served its purpose, Jennifer said quietly. It got us through some hard years. It did, I agreed. But I'm not sure it's serving either of us anymore. She was silent for a moment, then asked, Does writing the memoir feel like going back to your old self or becoming someone new? Neither, I said. It feels like becoming more fully myself. All the pieces finally fitting together instead of being kept in separate compartments. Later that week, I reconnected with Diane Levinson, a colleague from my early teaching days who had maintained her activist involvement throughout her academic career. She had always been braver than me, less willing to compartmentalize her politics and her profession. We met for lunch at a vegetarian cafe near the university where we'd both taught, though Diane had retired 5 years before me. Eleanor Mitchell, she said as we embraced, holding me at arm's length to study my new appearance. Look at you, finally letting your freak flag fly. I laughed, settling into a chair across from her. Better late than never? Absolutely better. Late than never. Though I have to say, I always wondered when the Berkeley radical I knew would reappear. You went into academic camouflage so thoroughly, I sometimes wondered if you'd forgotten who you were. Her words stung slightly, though I knew she meant no harm. I didn't forget, I said. I just prioritized differently. Jennifer needed stability after Thomas died. Diane's expression softened. Of course she did. And you were an amazing mother, Eleanor. No one would dispute that. But your daughter's been an adult for a long time now. What's been holding you back since then? It was a fair question. one I'd been asking myself repeatedly in recent weeks. Habit, I suppose, and fear. The longer you maintain a certain image, the harder it becomes to shed it. "Well, you seem to be shedding it quite effectively now," Diane observed, gesturing to my leather jacket and the silver pendant I wore. A piece Thomas had given me for our 5th anniversary that I'd kept in my jewelry box for decades, deeming it too bohemian for the image I was cultivating. "I have Tyler to thank for that," I said, explaining about his history project and the subsequent unraveling of my careful compartmentalization. Diane listened intently, nodding occasionally. "Isn't it fascinating how life works?" she said when I'd finished. "This teenager dismisses you as irrelevant, and in trying to prove your relevance, you rediscover parts of yourself you'd set aside. Beautiful irony." "I hadn't thought of it that way," I admitted. "But yes, I suppose it is ironic." "So what now, besides the memoir and the makeover?" I sipped my herbal tea, considering. "I'm teaching that community course on social movements at the library. I'm helping Tyler with research for his climate activism. I'm having more honest conversations with Jennifer about the past. But beyond that?" I shrugged. "I'm still figuring it out." "You know," Diane said, leaning forward slightly, "there's a coalition of retired academics and community activists forming to address affordable housing issues in the county. We could use someone with your historical perspective and research skills." "Are you trying to recruit me, Diane?" She grinned. "Is it working?" I found myself smiling back. "Maybe. Tell me more." By the time we parted 3 hours later, I had agreed to attend the coalition's next meeting and to review some research they'd compiled on housing discrimination in our area over the past 50 years. As I walked to my car, I felt a familiar flutter of excitement in my chest. The same feeling I'd had before marches and teach-ins in my youth. The satisfaction of putting knowledge into action, of being engaged with issues that mattered. When I arrived home, there was a package waiting on my doorstep, a delivery from an online bookstore. I didn't recall ordering anything, but when I opened it, I found a first edition of Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, with a note from Jennifer. "Mom, found this at that rare bookstore in Northampton. Thought it might be meaningful for your collection, and maybe useful for the memoir. Love, J." I traced the embossed cover with my fingertips, unexpectedly moved by my daughter's gesture. She was reaching across the gap I'd created with my years of careful omission, offering not just acknowledgement, but active support of the self I was reclaiming. The following Tuesday, I attended my first meeting with the Housing Coalition. It was held in the basement of a Unitarian church, reminiscent of so many meetings I'd attended in my younger years. About 20 people were present, a mix of ages and backgrounds, but predominantly older folks with the time and inclination for community engagement. Diane introduced me simply as Eleanor Mitchell, historian and author, making no mention of my former academic position or my familial roles. It felt refreshing to be defined by my work and interests, rather than by my relationship to others. The meeting was focused on documenting patterns of gentrification in formerly redlined neighborhoods and developing strategies to protect long-term residents from displacement. It was substantive, well-organized, and clearly led by people who understood both the historical context and current political realities of housing policy. I found myself taking notes, asking questions, and eventually volunteering to help compile an oral history project, capturing the experiences of elderly residents at risk of being priced out of homes they'd occupied for decades. "You seemed in your element tonight," Diane commented as we walked to our cars afterward. "More like the Eleanor I remember from the early days." "It felt good," I admitted, using my skills for something beyond academic publication or classroom teaching. "Will you come to the City Council meeting next week? We're presenting our findings on the impact of the new luxury development downtown. Could use a historian's gravitas." I hesitated only briefly. "Yes, I'll be there." When I mentioned my involvement in the coalition to Jennifer during our now regular midweek phone calls, Her response surprised me. The housing group? I've read about their work in the local paper. They're doing important advocacy. There was a note of approval in her voice I hadn't anticipated. You don't think it's too political for a grandmother? I asked, only half joking. Mom, I think we've established that you're not exactly a typical grandmother. I could hear the smile in her voice. Besides, isn't this closer to who you've always been? The historian? Who cares about justice, not just dates and documents? Yes, I said, relief washing through me at her understanding. It is. Then I'm happy for you. Just don't get arrested again, okay? I'm not sure Mark's heart could take the scandal. We both laughed, and I marveled at how quickly humor about my arrest had become possible between us. How what had once been a closely guarded secret was now a shared reference point, almost a family joke. The city council meeting the following week proved more contentious than I'd anticipated. The luxury development had powerful backers, including several council members with ties to the real estate industry. When it was my turn to speak, I approached, the microphone with notes about historical housing patterns in hand, prepared to make a measured academic argument. But as I looked out at the room, at the elderly residents who had come despite difficulty with transportation and mobility, at the young families worried about being priced out of their neighborhoods, at the skeptical expressions of council, members who had already decided to prioritize development over community needs, I set my notes aside. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, I began. I'm a retired history professor, a homeowner in this community for over 40 years, and a mother and grandmother. I'm here because history has taught us that when communities don't defend their most vulnerable members, everyone eventually suffers. I spoke without referring to my notes, drawing connections between current development patterns and historical injustices, emphasizing the human cost of displacement, and challenging the council to consider long-term community welfare over short-term economic gains. As I spoke, I felt a familiar rhythm returning, the cadence of conviction, the clarity that comes when speaking truth as you understand it, regardless of how it might be received. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before applause erupted from the community members in attendance. Several approached me afterward, thanking me for articulating what they had been feeling but struggled to express. One elderly woman gripped my hand and said simply, "You spoke for us. Thank you." As I was gathering my belongings, preparing to leave, I glanced toward the back of the room and froze. Tyler was standing near the exit, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When our eyes met, he raised his hand in a small wave. I made my way through the dispersing crowd to reach him. "Tyler, what are you doing here?" "School project on local government," he said, but the slight flush creeping up his neck suggested there might be more to it. That was pretty intense. "Grandma, you totally called out the council on their BS. Language," I admonished automatically, then smiled. "But yes, I suppose I did. Someone needed to. A bunch of people were filming you on their phones. You might go viral." The thought hadn't occurred to me, and I felt a momentary flutter of anxiety. I doubt that. Council meetings aren't exactly trending content. Don't be so sure. Oldie. Lady taking down corrupt politicians? That's social media gold. Old lady. I raised an eyebrow. I prefer seasoned activist. Tyler grinned. Even better. The algorithm loves that kind of stuff. As we walked to the parking lot together, Tyler asked thoughtful questions about the housing issues and my involvement with the coalition. I explained as we drove to his house, surprised by his level of engagement. "So, is this what you were like all the time? Before, I mean," he asked as we pulled into Jennifer's driveway. "Before what?" "Before you became just Grandma." He winced slightly. "Sorry, that came out wrong." "No, I understand what you're asking." I turned off the engine and shifted to face him. "And yes, this is closer to who I was before your grandfather died. before I focused so completely on security and stability. I was more outspoken, more publicly engaged with issues I cared about. "I like this version of you," he said simply. "Not that I didn't like you before, but now you seem more real." "Thank you, Tyler. That means a lot to me." Inside, Jennifer was waiting up despite the late hour. "How was the council meeting?" she asked, looking between Tyler and me. Curiously. "Grandma was a total badass," Tyler announced before I could respond. "She basically told the whole council they were selling out the community to developers." Jennifer's eyebrows shot up. "Did she now?" "I wouldn't put it quite that way," I said, shooting Tyler a look. "But yes, I did speak rather forcefully about the importance of protecting vulnerable residents from displacement." "She was amazing," Tyler insisted. "I got it all on video." "You did?" Jennifer and I asked simultaneously. "Yeah, I'll show you." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times before handing it to his mother. Jennifer watched the recording of my speech, her expression shifting from curiosity to surprise to something like pride. When it ended, she looked up, at me with shining eyes. "Mom, that was... wow. I had no idea you could speak like that. So passionate, but also so clear and compelling." "I used to do it rather regularly," I admitted. "At rallies, at teach-ins, at community meetings. It's a skill that apparently doesn't entirely fade, even with disuse." "Definitely doesn't," she agreed, handing the phone back to Tyler. "I'm impressed and proud." Those simple words, "I'm proud," echoed in my mind as I drove home that night. How long had it been since I'd felt that particular warmth, the satisfaction of having a child proud of their parent rather than the reverse? It was a reversal of the usual order, and yet it felt right somehow, as if the more authentically myself I became, the more Jennifer could see me as a whole person rather than just in my maternal role. The following morning, my phone began chiming with text notifications before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. The first was from Tyler. "Told you, you're going viral." Then from Diane. "Have you seen what's happening with your speech?" And from Jennifer. "Mom, check your email. I sent you some links you need to see." With a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, I opened my laptop and clicked through the links Jennifer had sent. Sure enough, a clip of my council meeting speech had been shared widely across several social media platforms. Some versions had added dramatic music or captions like "Grandmother destroys corrupt council" or "Professor Emeritus speaks truth to power." The comment sections were filled with variations on "I wish she was my grandmother" and "This is the energy we need from older generations," interspersed with more substantive discussions about housing policy and community organizing. Several local news outlets had picked up the story, framing it as part of a broader narrative about grassroots resistance to gentrification. By midday, I'd received emails from former colleagues, students, and friends, as far back as my Berkeley days, who had somehow come across the video. The most surprising message came from the university press publishing my academic books, suggesting we might want to accelerate the timeline for my memoir, given my emerging public profile. It was all rather overwhelming. I had never sought public attention, had in fact spent decades carefully curating a professional image that wouldn't attract controversy. Now, with one unguarded moment of authentic speech, I had become something of a minor internet sensation. When Lily called that evening, barely containing her excitement, I learned that my unexpected social media presence had elevated my standing considerably in her eyes. "Grandma, you're all over TikTok. Some of the seniors at school were talking about your speech. They didn't even believe me at first when I said you were my grandmother." "I'm not sure how I feel about being TikTok famous at 73, I admitted. "Are you kidding? It's amazing. Do you know how many grandmothers would kill to go viral for something actually cool instead of, like, baking cookies or knitting or whatever?" I laughed despite myself. I suppose when you put it that way. The coalition seized the moment, using the unexpected attention to amplify their message and pressure the city council to consider alternative proposals that would include affordable housing provisions. I found myself drawn more deeply into their work, attending strategy sessions and contributing to position papers with an energy I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, I continued work on my memoir, finding that the recent events had crystallized something important about the narrative I wanted to tell. Not just about the movements I'd been part of, but about the cost of compartmentalizing one's identity, of separating the personal from the political, and the possibility of reclaiming wholeness even late in life. One morning, about 3 weeks after the council meeting video went viral, I was sorting through old photographs for possible inclusion in the memoir when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jennifer standing there, a determined expression on her face, and a large cardboard box in her arms. "I've been cleaning out the attic," she said by way of greeting, stepping past me into the entryway. "Found some things I thought you might want." She set the box down on my coffee table and began removing items, protest signs from the women's, marches of the 1970s that I'd stored at her house years ago when my condo was being renovated, thinking I might reclaim them someday but never quite finding the right moment. A collection of feminist literature I'd set aside for her that she'd never shown interest in, and most surprisingly, a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. "These were in Dad's old desk," she explained, handling the letters carefully. "They're from you to him, from when you were first dating. I've never read them, that felt too private, but I thought you might want them back, especially now that you're writing about your life together." I took the bundle, my fingers trembling slightly as I recognized my own youthful handwriting on the envelopes. "Thank you. These will be meaningful to revisit." Jennifer sat beside me on the sofa, watching as I carefully untied the ribbon and selected the letter from the top of the stack. It was dated June 1968, written during a summer when Thomas and I had been separated while he worked a legal internship in Washington, D.C., and I remained in Berkeley. "My dearest Thomas," it began. "The world feels both on fire and full of possibility. Yesterday, we occupied the administration building to protest the university's contracts with weapons manufacturers. Tonight, there's a concert in the park. Joan Baez might perform. Everything feels connected. The war, the freedom struggles here at home, the music, the way we're creating new ways of being together as men and women. I miss you terribly, but am sustained by knowing we're working toward the same vision, even miles apart." My voice faltered as emotions welled up. Not just nostalgia for that passionate young woman and the man she loved, but grief for all the years I'd kept her hidden away, even from our daughter. "You can read them all to me," Jennifer said softly, "if you want to. I'd like to know who you were then, who you and Dad were together." And so we spent the afternoon with those letters spread between us, my voice bringing to life the hopes, fears, convictions, and love that had defined my relationship with Thomas in those formative years. Jennifer listened intently, occasionally, asking questions or noting parallels to current events. By the time we reached the final letter in the stack, written just weeks before Thomas and I had married, the afternoon light was fading. "I cannot wait to begin our life together," I read, "not just as husband and wife in the conventional sense, but as partners in creating the world we believe in. When I imagine our future, I see us marching side by side, raising children who understand justice from their earliest moments, growing older together but never giving up the fight for what matters. With you, I feel brave enough for whatever comes. All my love, Eleanor." Silence fell between us as I carefully refolded the letter and slipped it back into its envelope. "You really loved him," Jennifer finally said. It wasn't a question. "With everything I was," I confirmed, which made losing him so much harder. He was my partner in every sense, intellectual, political, emotional. "And after he died, you just carried on alone, raised me, built your career, kept going. What else could I do? I shrugged slightly. Life continues, ready or not. Jennifer was quiet for a moment, then said, I think I understand better now why you didn't tell me everything about your past, about who you and Dad were together. It wasn't just about protecting me or your career. It was about protecting yourself, too. Those memories were precious and painful. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. But Mom, she continued, reaching for my hand, I'm not a child anymore. I don't need protecting. And neither do you, not anymore. We can honor Dad's memory by being honest about who he was, who you were together, and who you've become since. You're right, I managed. It's time for honesty, for integration rather than compartmentalization. As Jennifer prepared to leave that evening, she paused at the door. By the way, I've been thinking about that environmental law course I never finished in college. Talking to Tyler about his climate activism, seeing you getting involved with the Housing Coalition. It's made me wonder if I could pick it up again. Maybe do some pro bono work with environmental groups. You'd be wonderful at that, I said, genuinely moved by her revelation. Your father would be so proud. And you? She asked. Are you proud of me? Always, I told her. But especially when you're pursuing what truly matters to you, not just what's expected. After she left, I returned to the living room and gathered the letters, holding them close to my heart for a moment before carefully placing them beside my memoir notes. They were no longer just relics of a past I'd tucked away, but vital threads reconnecting the various chapters of my life, helping me weave them into a more complete and honest tapestry. That night, I dreamed of Thomas again. But unlike previous dreams where he appeared as he had been, young, passionate, forever frozen in time, in this dream, he was older, with silver threading his dark hair and laugh lines crinkling around his eyes. We were walking together on a beach, talking animatedly about our daughter, about the world's ongoing struggles, about the work still to be done. You found your way back, he said in the dream, his voice as warm and rich as I remembered. To who I was? I asked. He shook his head, smiling. To who you are, past, present, future, all of it, Ellie, all of you. I woke with tears on my cheeks, but a profound sense of peace in my heart. The compartments I'd built over decades to contain, the different aspects of myself were dissolving, allowing for a more authentic wholeness. It wasn't always comfortable, integration rarely is, but it felt right. It felt like coming home to myself. Summer arrived with unexpected intensity, bringing heat waves that broke records across New England. My small garden wilted under the ice. Relentless sun despite my diligent watering, and even the usually bustling downtown of Glastonbury grew quiet in the oppressive afternoon heat. But while the temperature soared outside, my relationship with my family continued to blossom in ways I couldn't have imagined just months earlier. Jennifer had indeed enrolled in that environmental law certificate program, attending evening classes twice a week while juggling her new creative director position. Mark, initially skeptical of her renewed academic pursuits, had gradually come to support her, even taking over dinner preparation on her class nights. A significant shift. In their household dynamics, Lily had joined a youth climate action group, inspired by both Tyler's activism and my own newly visible engagement with community issues. And Tyler, my once dismissive grandson, had become something of a partner in social justice work, often calling to discuss tactics or historical parallels to current movements. The family had taken to gathering at my condo on Thursday evenings rather than always meeting at Jennifer and Mark's house for Sunday dinners. These Thursday sessions, as Tyler dubbed them, began as casual dinners but evolved into lively discussions about current events, social issues, and personal reflections. Mark still occasionally checked out when the conversation became too political for his taste, but even he had begun to engage more meaningfully, particularly on environmental topics that affected his work in commercial real estate. It was during one such Thursday evening in late July that Tyler made an announcement that would set in motion events none of us could have anticipated. "So," he said, placing his water glass down with deliberate care, "I've been accepted to the Youth Climate Leadership Summit in Boston next month. It's a pretty big deal. Only 50 students from across New England get in." "That's wonderful, Tyler," I exclaimed, genuinely proud of his accomplishment. The summit was indeed prestigious, bringing together promising young activists for intensive training and networking. "Congratulations, honey," Jennifer added, though I detected a note of caution in her voice. "What exactly will this involve?" Tyler straightened in his seat, shifting into what I'd come to recognize as his presentation posture. Shoulders back, chin slightly raised, voice modulated to project confidence. "It's a 4-day program at Northeastern University. We'll have workshops with climate scientists, media training, strategy sessions with experienced organizers, and we'll develop action plans to implement in our communities." "Sounds intense," Mark commented, reaching for another dinner roll. "Good for you, bud." "Thanks," Tyler said, then hesitated before continuing. "There's just one thing. They want each participant to bring a mentor, someone who's experienced in activism or advocacy. And," he looked directly at me, "I was hoping Grandma would come with me." The request caught me completely off guard. "Me? But surely there are more qualified mentors. Your environmental science teacher, perhaps, or someone from one of the organizations you've been working with." Tyler shook his head firmly. "The point isn't just to have an expert in climate science. It's to have someone who understands how movements work, how change happens over time, someone who's been through it themselves." His expression was earnest, almost pleading. "Besides, after your city council speech went viral, you're kind of famous in youth activist circles. Having you there would be a huge advantage." I felt a complex mix of emotions: pride that Tyler valued my experience, trepidation about stepping into such a visible mentorship role, and a flutter of excitement at the prospect of engaging directly with young activists working on issues I cared deeply about. "I'd be honored," I said finally, "though I should warn you, my protest chants are probably quite dated by now." The table erupted in laughter, and the conversation moved on to logistics: where we would stay in Boston, what I should prepare, how Tyler should dress for the various events. But beneath the practical discussions, I sensed a current of tension, from Mark, who grew quieter as the meal progressed. After dinner, as Jennifer and I were clearing dishes, Mark beckoned Tyler into the living room. Though they spoke in hushed tones, the condo's open floor plan carried fragments of their conversation. "To the kitchen. Need to think carefully about this," Mark was saying. "Getting too involved in activism at your age could affect college applications." "Already submitted my activity list," Tyler responded, his voice tight with restraint. "Besides, colleges want students who show leadership and commitment, not just good grades." "Leadership is one thing," Mark countered, "but associating yourself with radical environmental groups, they're not radical." Tyler's volume rose despite his obvious effort to remain calm. "And even if they were, what's wrong with taking a strong position on the most important issue facing my generation?" Jennifer and I exchanged glances but continued our work in the kitchen, giving father and son the illusion of privacy while silently acknowledging the growing ideological divide between them. Later, as Jennifer helped me load the dishwasher, she murmured, "Mark's worried about Tyler getting too political. He thinks it could limit his opportunities." "And what do you think?" I asked, genuinely curious about her position in this family dynamic. She sighed, arranging silverware in the dishwasher basket with meticulous care. I think I spent too many years playing it safe, worrying about how I might be perceived. I don't want Tyler to look back at 25 years from now and regret not standing up for what he believes in. Her words warmed me more than she could know. Jennifer, that's exactly what your father and I always hoped to instill in you. The courage to live according to your convictions. She smiled sadly. I know. I just took a detour for a while, but I'm finding my way back. The month leading up to the summit passed in a flurry of preparation. Tyler and I met regularly to discuss the agenda, review materials sent by the organizers, and prepare for our respective roles. I found myself pulling books from my shelves that I hadn't opened in years, analyses of social movement strategy, histories of environmental activism, memoirs of organizers who had successfully built coalitions across diverse constituencies. Jennifer threw herself into helping as well, gathering appropriate clothing for both Tyler and me, researching the best routes around Boston, even creating a shared digital document where we could all contribute ideas and resources. Mark maintained a polite but palpable distance from the preparations, his concerns surfacing only occasionally in offhand comments about balancing perspective and considering all stakeholders. 2 days before we were scheduled to depart for Boston, Tyler called me in a state of agitation. "Grandma, you won't believe what Dad just did." "What happened?" I asked, setting aside the book I'd been reading, a recent publication on youth, movements and climate justice that Tyler had recommended. "He went behind my back and called Uncle Richard to come talk to me about the realities of environmental regulation." I could hear the air quotes in Tyler's voice, the barely contained fury. "Uncle Richard works for an oil company, for God's sake." He spent an hour telling me how carbon taxes would destroy the economy and how climate activists don't understand practical solutions. Richard was Mark's older brother, a corporate attorney who represented energy companies and had always struck me as someone who valued financial success above all other considerations. That Mark would enlist him to educate Tyler revealed just how deeply he disagreed with his son's activism. "That must have been frustrating," I said carefully, trying to validate Tyler's feelings while not exacerbating the conflict. "What did you say to your uncle?" "I thanked him for his perspective and said I'd consider his points," Tyler replied, his tone suggesting this response had cost him considerable restraint. Then I went to my room and compiled a document with peer-reviewed research refuting every single claim he made and emailed it to both him and Dad. Despite the seriousness of the situation, I couldn't help but smile at my grandson's thorough approach to disagreement. "And how did that go over?" "Dad's barely speaking to me. He says I was disrespectful to Uncle Richard and that I'm becoming radicalized." The hurt beneath his anger was palpable. Mom's trying to mediate, but she and Dad ended up arguing. It's a mess, Grandma." I took a deep breath, weighing my words carefully. As much as I admired Tyler's passion and Jennifer's growing willingness to challenge Mark's conservatism, I was acutely aware of the potential for lasting damage to family relationships. "Tyler, remember that your father's concerns come from love, even if they're expressed in ways that feel dismissive of your values. He's worried about your future as he understands it." "But his version of my future isn't what I want," Tyler protested. "He wants me to play it safe, focus on grades and sports and conventional success. That's his dream, not mine." "I know," I acknowledged. "And it takes courage to chart your own course, but try to see that your father is grappling with his own fears and limitations. People who haven't personally engaged with activism often can't understand its value until they see concrete results." There was a long pause before Tyler responded, his voice quieter now. "So, what should I do? Just give up on the summit? On everything I believe in?" "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "You stand your ground on principle, but you do it with compassion for those who don't yet share your vision. Remember that movements succeed not by alienating potential allies, but by helping them see possibilities they couldn't imagine before." "That's actually really good advice," Tyler admitted. "I've been so angry at Dad that I haven't tried to understand where he's coming from at all." It's a practice, I told him. One I'm still working on myself, decades into this journey. After we hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about the parallels between Tyler's current conflict with his father and some of my own experiences. The dismissal from family members who couldn't understand my activism in the 60s, the gradual process of either bringing them along or accepting the distance their disapproval created. It had been painful at times, but also necessary for becoming fully myself. The tensions in Jennifer and Mark's household had not resolved by the time Tyler and I departed for Boston. Mark drove us to the train station in strained silence, offering only a perfunctory, "Good luck," as Tyler retrieved our luggage from the trunk. Jennifer hugged us both fiercely, whispering, "I'm proud of you," in Tyler's ear, loudly enough that I could hear it too. On the train, Tyler was uncharacteristically quiet, staring out the window as Connecticut's landscape rolled past. Finally, as we approached the Massachusetts border, he turned to me. "Do you think Dad will ever understand why this matters so much to me?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't know, Tyler. Some people's worldviews are very resistant to change. But I do believe that seeing you engage thoughtfully and effectively with these issues might challenge his assumptions over time." "I hope so," he said, returning his gaze to the window. "Because right now it feels like we're living in completely different realities." The summit itself was a revelation, not just for Tyler, but for me as well. The organizers had created a program that balanced education about climate science with practical training in communications, fundraising, coalition building, and sustainable self-care for activists. The 50 student participants, ranging in age from 15 to 18, displayed a sophistication about intersectional issues and a tech-savvy approach to organizing that both impressed and occasionally intimidated me. As one of the older mentors, I was initially concerned about being perceived as out of touch, an irony not lost on me, given how this journey had begun. But to my surprise, the young activists and the other mentors, a diverse group that included environmental scientists, community organizers, indigenous leaders, and policy experts, welcomed my historical perspective and organizing experience. During a workshop on movement building, I shared stories from the anti-war and women's movements of the 60s and 70s, emphasizing both the successes and the missteps, the moments of unity and the painful fractures around race and class. The students listened intently, drawing parallels to their own experiences and asking thoughtful questions about sustaining momentum through inevitable setbacks. "The mistake many observers make," I told them, "is assuming that movements progress in a linear fashion. But real change is messy, cyclical, often frustratingly slow with occasional bursts of rapid progress. The key is building relationships and systems that can survive the valleys between the peaks." One evening, as Tyler and I walked back to our hotel after a particularly intense day of training, he said something that stopped me in my tracks. "You know what's weird, Grandma? I keep thinking about Dad during these sessions." "How so?" I asked, curious about this unexpected turn. "Well, he's always talking about the importance of financial security, about making responsible choices, about how my generation doesn't understand economic realities." Tyler kicked at a pebble on the sidewalk. "But listening to the climate scientists today, all I could think was that Dad's the one who doesn't understand reality. The economic system he's so invested in is literally destroying the conditions that make human life possible." "That's a profound realization," I said, "and a painful one when it creates distance from someone you love." "Yeah," Tyler agreed. "But here's the thing. I don't want to dismiss his concerns the way he dismisses mine. I want to find a way to talk about this that he might actually hear." I smiled at my grandson, this young man who was displaying wisdom beyond his years. "That's exactly the right approach, Tyler, and it's a lot more mature than how many adults handle disagreement." "I learned it from you," he said simply. "Watching how you engage with people who disagree with you, not shutting them down or writing them off, but really trying to meet them where they are." His words touched me deeply. For all my concern about how my compartmentalization might have affected Jennifer, perhaps some of the values I held most dear had still been visible enough for her son to absorb them. The final day of the summit featured a public event, a press conference where student participants shared their action plans with local media, followed by a rally on the steps of the Massachusetts State House. Tyler had been selected to speak on behalf of the Connecticut delegation, an honor that both thrilled and terrified him. What if I mess up? He fretted that morning as we ate breakfast in the hotel restaurant. What if I forget my points or get asked a question I can't answer? Then you'll acknowledge the limits of your knowledge and redirect to what you do know, I told him calmly. Remember, authenticity is more persuasive than perfect polish. He nodded, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate without eating them. I just keep thinking about Dad watching this on the live stream. He's going to be critiquing every word. Maybe, I acknowledged. Or maybe he'll be surprised by how articulate and thoughtful you are about these complex issues. Either way, focus on communicating clearly to the audience that's ready to hear you. That's all you can control. The press conference was held in a sunlit atrium at Northeastern University. Student speakers addressed different aspects of the climate crisis: the science, the policy landscape, the disproportionate impacts on vulnerable communities, and the ethical imperatives for action. When Tyler's turn came, he approached the microphone with shoulders squared, looking far older than his 16 years in the blazer and button-down shirt Jennifer had carefully selected. "My name is Tyler Wilson," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves he'd displayed earlier. "I'm a junior at Hartford Central High School in Connecticut, and I'm here because my generation cannot afford the luxury of climate denial or delay." He proceeded to outline the action plan he'd developed during the summit, an initiative to work with local businesses to reduce plastic waste and energy consumption, creating both environmental benefits and cost savings that he hoped would appeal to conservative community members as well as progressives. "We don't have to choose between economic vitality and environmental protection," he emphasized. "In fact, addressing climate change creates opportunities for innovation, job creation, and community resilience. What we can't afford is continued inaction based on false dichotomies and short-term thinking." His delivery was confident, his arguments nuanced and well-supported. As he fielded questions from reporters with thoughtful, measured responses, I felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. This poised young advocate bore little resemblance to the dismissive teenager who had called me out of touch less than a year ago. During the Q&A session, a reporter asked Tyler, "Where did you develop your interest in environmental activism? Was there someone who particularly influenced your thinking on these issues?" Tyler glanced in my direction before answering, "Actually, yes. My grandmother, Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, has been a huge influence on me. Not because she pushed any particular agenda, but because she taught me how to think critically about systems and power, how to connect historical patterns to present challenges." He smiled. "She also showed me that it's never too late to get involved in causes you care about. She's here today, and I wouldn't be standing at this microphone if she hadn't shared her own activist experiences with me." The reporter turned her attention to me, sitting in the front row. "Dr. Mitchell, would you like to comment on your grandson's work?" Put on the spot, I rose and moved to join Tyler at the microphone. "I'm incredibly proud of Tyler and all these young leaders," I said. "They're facing challenges my generation failed to adequately address, yet they're responding with courage, creativity, and a commitment to justice that gives me tremendous hope." I placed my hand on Tyler's shoulder. "They're not just the leaders of tomorrow. They're leading right now, if we have the wisdom to follow." The press conference concluded to enthusiastic applause, and as the attendees began dispersing, a commotion near the back of the room caught my attention. Tyler noticed it too, his expression shifting from satisfaction to shock. "Dad," he whispered, "what's he doing here?" Sure enough, Mark was making his way through the crowd toward us, his expression unreadable. Jennifer followed close behind him, her eyes bright with what looked like unshed tears. "You came," Tyler said when his parents reached us, his voice a mixture of surprise and wariness. "I thought you were watching the live stream from home." "We were going to," Mark said, his normally confident demeanor subdued. "But then I realized I needed to be here, to see this for myself." An awkward silence fell between them, broken when a summit organizer approached to remind Tyler that the rally at the State House would begin in 30 minutes. "We need to head over now if you're still planning to participate," she added. Tyler looked uncertainly between the organizer and his father. Go," Mark said firmly. "We'll be there. Your mother and I wouldn't miss it." As Tyler left with the other student speakers, I turned to Mark and Jennifer. "This is unexpected. You drove all the way from Hartford this morning?" Jennifer nodded, linking her arm through Mark's. "It was Mark's idea, actually. He wanted to surprise Tyler." Mark cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional undercurrent of the moment. "Look, Eleanor, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye on a lot of things. But watching that press conference, seeing Tyler up there, speaking with such conviction." He shook his head slightly. "I didn't raise him to be an activist, but I did raise him to stand up for what he believes in. And he's doing that in a way that's actually pretty impressive." "Yes, he is," I agreed. "He's a remarkable young man." "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at our house that time," Mark continued. "About how the greatest risk isn't in taking stands but in living in a way that doesn't align with your values. I'm still not sure I agree with all of Tyler's positions, but I'm proud of how he's pursuing them." Jennifer squeezed her husband's arm, a gesture of support and perhaps surprise at his candor. "We both are," she added, "and grateful for how you've mentored him through this." "He's done the hard work himself," I demurred. "I've just provided some historical context." Mark shook his head. "It's more than that. You've given him something I couldn't, a model for how to engage with issues he cares about in a principled, effective way." He hesitated, then added, "I may not share your politics, Eleanor, but I respect your integrity. And I see how having you in his life has helped Tyler develop his own sense of purpose." Coming from Mark, pragmatic, conventional Mark, who had always seemed slightly intimidated by my academic background and barely tolerant of my more progressive views, this acknowledgement felt momentous. I found myself at a rare loss for words. "Thank you," I finally managed. "That means a lot." As we made our way to the State House rally, Jennifer filled me in on what had transpired at home after Tyler and I left for Boston. Mark was pretending. He wasn't interested in the summit, but he kept checking the website to see what you two were doing each day. Then last night, he overheard me watching a video Tyler sent of one of your workshops, the one where you were talking about how movements need to connect immediate concerns to long-term vision. "I remember," I said. "Tyler asked good questions in that session." "Well, Mark listened to the whole thing, and afterward he said something that shocked me. He said, 'You know, Eleanor's approach actually makes sense. She's not just shouting slogans. She's talking about strategy, about meeting people where they are.'" Jennifer smiled at the memory. "And then this morning, he came downstairs with his keys in hand and said, 'Let's go to Boston. I want to hear what Tyler has to say.' In person." The rally itself was energetic but disciplined, with student speakers alternating with climate scientists and community leaders affected by environmental injustice. Tyler delivered a shorter version of his press conference remarks, adding, "A personal note about how engaging with these issues had changed his understanding of citizenship and responsibility. From my position near the edge of the crowd, I watched Mark's face as his son spoke. The initial stiffness in his expression gradually softened, replaced by something that looked remarkably like respect. When Tyler concluded to enthusiastic cheers, Mark was applauding as vigorously as anyone in the crowd. Afterward, as we gathered on the steps for photographs, I found myself standing beside Mark. "It's quite something, isn't it?" I said quietly, watching them find their voices. "It is," he agreed. "Though I have to admit, it's a little easier to handle when it's someone else's kids becoming activists. When it's your own." He shook his head. "There's all this fear mixed in. Fear they'll be disappointed. Fear they'll face backlash. Fear they're not seeing the whole picture." "That's natural," I assured him. "Their parents worried about the same things when we were protesting the Vietnam War or marching for civil rights. Fear is part of love." "I suppose so." He was quiet for a moment, watching as Tyler chatted animatedly with other student participants. "Eleanor, can I ask you something? Looking back on your activism days, do you have regrets? Things you wish you'd done differently?" The question surprised me with its directness. "Of course," I said honestly. "I regret times when zeal overshadowed compassion, when I was so certain of being right that I couldn't hear other perspectives. I regret moments when the movement fractured over ideological purity tests instead of finding common ground in shared goals." I paused, considering. "But I don't regret standing up for what I believed in, even when it was difficult or unpopular. I don't regret trying to create a more just world, even when those efforts were imperfect." Mark nodded slowly. "That's very fair, and actually very helpful." He glanced toward Tyler again. "I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how to support him while still being honest about my concerns. How to be a good father to an activist son when I'm not an activist. By remembering that your role isn't to create a carbon copy of yourself," I said gently. "It's to help him become the most authentic version of who he is, even if that person sees the world differently than you do." Something in Mark's expression shifted then, a subtle softening, an opening. "You know, Eleanor, I think I'm finally beginning to understand what Tyler sees in you." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of activities as the summit concluded. Tyler was elated by his parents' surprise appearance and by the connections he'd made with other young activists across New England. As we prepared to return to Connecticut the following morning, Mark and Jennifer by car, Tyler and I by train as originally planned, there was a palpable sense of something having shifted in the family dynamic. On the train ride home, Tyler was more reflective than I'd ever seen him. "Grandma, can I tell you something weird? Seeing Dad at the rally today, it made me realize that maybe he and I aren't as different as I thought." "How so?" I asked, curious about this unexpected insight. "Well, he's always been so focused on security, on making responsible choices, on planning for the future. And, in a way, that's exactly what climate activism is about. Securing a livable future, making responsible choices about resources, planning for long-term sustainability." Tyler smiled ruefully. "We just define those things differently." "That's a profound observation," I told him, "and potentially a bridge between your perspectives, if you both choose to see it that way." "Maybe," he agreed. "I'm not expecting him to start showing up at protests with me. But it means a lot that he came to Boston, that he listened, that he's trying to understand." As we neared Hartford, Tyler grew quiet again, staring out the window at the passing scenery. Finally, he turned to me with an expression that reminded me forcefully of Jennifer at the same age, earnest, searching, on the cusp of an important realization. "You know what's really weird?" he said. "All this time, I thought you were the one who needed to catch up, to get with the times, to understand how the world works now. But actually, I was the one who needed to learn from you, about history, about how change really happens, about standing up for what matters even when it's hard." He smiled, a little embarrassed by his own earnestness. "So, I guess I'm saying, I'm sorry I called you out of touch. You might be the most in-touch person I know. I reached across to squeeze his hand, too moved for immediate words. When I could speak, I said simply, "That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." And as the train pulled into Hartford Station, where Jennifer and Mark waited to drive us home, I felt a sense of completion, of cycles connecting across generations. The thread that ran from Thomas and me through Jennifer to Tyler wasn't the straight line I might once have imagined, but rather a spiral, doubling back on itself even as it moved forward, allowing each generation to rediscover truths the previous one had momentarily set aside. Autumn painted the Connecticut landscape in brilliant hues of gold and crimson as life settled into a new rhythm for all of us. My memoir manuscript was progressing steadily, with my editor providing enthusiastic feedback on each chapter. The Housing Coalition had won a significant victory when the City Council approved an inclusionary zoning ordinance requiring developers to include affordable units in new projects. And most surprisingly, my brief moment of internet fame had led to invitations to speak at several colleges and community organizations about intergenerational activism. But the most profound changes were happening within our family. The Thursday evening gatherings at my condo had become a cherished tradition, evolving from simple dinners into what Tyler jokingly called the Mitchell-Wilson think tank. Jennifer would arrive with notes from her environmental law classes, eager to discuss connections between legal theories and practical applications. Mark, while still the most conservative voice in our discussions, had begun making genuine efforts to understand different perspectives rather than dismissing them outright. Lily, inspired by her brother's activism, had started a school newspaper, column focused on social justice issues. And Tyler, my once dismissive grandson, had bloomed into a thoughtful young leader who balanced passion with strategic thinking. One crisp October evening, as we sat around my living room with mugs of apple cider, the conversation turned to Thanksgiving plans. "Mom, why don't you host this year?" Jennifer suggested. "Your place has better energy for real conversations than our house." Really? I was surprised by the proposal. Holiday hosting had always been Jennifer and Mark's domain, with me in the traditional grandmother role of bringing side dishes and helping with cleanup. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Mark chimed in, surprising me further. "Your living room has become our forum for honest exchange. Seems fitting to celebrate gratitude in a space that's helped us all grow." I was touched by the suggestion, but uncertain about the logistics. "That's lovely, but my dining table only seats 6 comfortably. With Richard and Patricia coming, plus David and his new girlfriend." "About that," Mark said, shifting slightly in his seat, "I've been thinking maybe we should scale back this year. Focus on our immediate family." Jennifer's eyebrows rose. "You don't want to invite your brother? That's unexpected." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair, which had acquired more silver strands in recent months. "After what happened with Tyler and the climate summit, I've been reevaluating some relationships. Richard and I had a long talk last week, and it didn't go well. He still thinks I've allowed Tyler to be brainwashed by radical environmentalists." He made air quotes with his fingers, his expression indicating how ridiculous he now found this characterization. "Wow, Dad," Tyler said, clearly stunned by this revelation. "You defended me to Uncle Richard?" "Of course I did," Mark replied, a hint of indignation in his voice. "You're my son. And frankly, after seeing how thoroughly you've researched these issues, how thoughtfully you engage with different viewpoints." Well, Richard's dismissive attitude felt increasingly untenable. The room fell silent as we all absorbed this significant shift. Mark had always deferred to his older brother, had modeled much of his approach to career and family on Richard's more traditional example. This separation, however small it might seem to outsiders, represented a major realignment in Mark's worldview. "So," I said after a moment, "a smaller Thanksgiving it is. Just the 5 of us?" Jennifer smiled. Actually, I had another idea. What if we invited some of your friends from the housing coalition? You've talked so much about Diane and the others. It might be nice to expand our circle a bit. That would be wonderful, I said, genuinely moved by the suggestion. Are you sure everyone would be comfortable with that? I think it's a great idea, Lily piped up. Grandma's cool activist friends probably have amazing stories. Mark nodded, though with a hint of his characteristic caution. I'm open to it, though maybe we keep it to just a few additional guests, so conversations can still be meaningful. And so it was decided. Thanksgiving would be at my condo, with our immediate family plus Diane, her wife Helen, and Manuel, a retired urban planner who had become one of my closest colleagues in the housing coalition. The holiday was still several weeks away, but I found myself looking forward to it with an anticipation I hadn't felt in years, not just for the celebration itself, but for what it represented, a genuine integration of the different aspects of my life that I had kept separate for so long. The following week brought an unexpected email from my university press editor. The production timeline for my memoir had been accelerated, and they now hoped to release it in March rather than September of the following year. This was exciting news professionally, but it meant a compressed schedule for completing revisions and reviewing the manuscript. Can you manage that timeline? Jennifer asked when I called to share the update. That's a lot of pressure over the holiday season. I think so, I said, mentally calculating the hours I'd need to devote to the project. I'll need to be disciplined about my time, but it's doable. And honestly, I'm eager to see it published. At my age, one doesn't like to delay things too long. I'd meant it as a light joke, but Jennifer's sharp intake of breath told me she hadn't taken it that way. Mom, don't say things like that. You're healthy and vibrant and could easily live another 20 years. I certainly hope so, I said gently. But life offers no guarantees at any age. And this book feels important, not just for me, but perhaps for readers who are struggling with their own questions about identity and purpose in different seasons of life. After a pause, Jennifer said, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About seasons of life, I mean. About how we keep evolving if we allow ourselves to. And have you been allowing yourself to evolve, Jennifer? I asked softly. She laughed, a warm sound with just a touch of self-consciousness. I'm trying. This environmental law program has awakened something in me I'd nearly forgotten. The thrill of intellectual challenge, the satisfaction of applying knowledge to problems that matter, and watching you reclaim parts of yourself that you'd set aside. It's been inspiring, Mom, truly. That means more to me than I can express, I told her. Seeing you reconnect with your passions is one of the greatest joys of my life. Even if it's creating some tension with Mark? The question had an edge of anxiety to it. Even then, I confirmed, relationships that can't accommodate growth aren't sustainable in the long run. And for what it's worth, I've seen Mark growing. Too, in his own way. He is, Jennifer acknowledged. Slowly, sometimes reluctantly, but genuinely. That summit with Tyler was a turning point for him. He saw something there that challenged his assumptions, not just about Tyler, but about activism in general. People can surprise us, I observed, especially when we give them room to evolve at their own pace. As we approached Thanksgiving, my days fell into a new rhythm. Mornings were devoted to memoir revisions, afternoons to housing coalition, work or preparations for speaking engagements, and evenings often included calls with Tyler to discuss his latest projects or help Jennifer study for her environmental law exams. It was a fuller schedule than I'd maintained in years, yet I found myself energized rather than exhausted by these varied commitments. One afternoon, as I was organizing materials for the memoir, I came across a photograph I hadn't seen in decades, Thomas, and me at a folk music festival in Golden Gate Park, summer of 1968. We were sitting on a blanket, his arm around my waist, both of us laughing at something now lost to memory. The vibrancy of that moment, the palpable connection between us, took my breath away. On impulse, I texted the image to Jennifer with a simple message. Your father and me, San Francisco, 1968. Just found this while sorting photos for the book. She called within minutes, her voice tinged with wonder. Mom, I've never seen this picture before. You both look so alive. We were, I said, smiling at the memory. That was during a folk festival in the park. I think Joan Baez had just performed, and we were drunk on music and sunshine and the belief that we could change the world. You look so in love, Jennifer said softly, and so young. We were that too, I agreed. Just kids, really, navigating tumultuous times together. You know what strikes me? Jennifer's tone shifted, becoming more reflective. In all the family photos I grew up with, you looked so much more contained, careful like you said before. But in this one, you look free. I admitted. That freedom was one of the casualties of losing your father so young, I think. The wild joy got replaced by determined survival. I wish I'd known him better, Jennifer said, a familiar sadness in her voice. Known both of you as you really were, not just as my parents. I wish that too, I told her. But maybe it's not too late to know me as I really am now, the synthesis of that young woman in the park and the mother who raised you. I'd like that, she said. I'm starting to think that's what growing up really means, seeing our parents as whole people, not just in relation to us. That's very wise, I said, pride swelling in my chest at her insight. And perhaps what growing older means is allowing ourselves to be fully seen, without the protective masks we've worn. The day before Thanksgiving, as I was preparing my condo for the next day's gathering, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Tyler standing there, a manila envelope in his hands and an expression of barely contained excitement on his face. Tyler, I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow. I know, he said, stepping inside and removing his jacket. But I wanted to give you this in private before everyone else arrives. He held out the envelope with a ceremonial flourish. What is it? I asked, accepting it curiously. Open it and see. Inside was a formal-looking letter on university letterhead. I scanned it quickly, then looked up at Tyler in astonishment. You applied to Berkeley? For college? He nodded, grinning widely. And that's an acceptance for fall admission. Early decision. Tyler, that's wonderful. I embraced him warmly. But I thought you were considering schools on the East Coast to stay closer to home. I was, he acknowledged, until I started learning more about your time there, about how transformative it was for you. Berkeley's environmental science program is one of the best in the country, and their student activism culture is still strong. He hesitated, then added, I wanted to experience some of what shaped you, to connect with that legacy. I was deeply moved by this revelation. Have you told your parents yet? Mom knows. She helped me with the application essays. But we agreed I should tell you first, since Berkeley has such significance for you. He paused. Dad doesn't know yet. I'm a little nervous about that part, to be honest. Understandable, I said, but I think he might surprise you. He's come a long way in recent months. I hope so, Tyler said, because there's more. He reached into the envelope and pulled out another document, a scholarship offer. I've been awarded the Climate Justice Leadership Scholarship. It's substantial, almost a full ride. Tyler, I exclaimed, that's incredible. Your work at the summit must have made quite an impression. Actually, he said, a flush of pride coloring his cheeks, when they asked for references, your name came up. Apparently, your reputation in activist circles carries more weight than I realized. The committee chair remembered your work from the 60s. This connection across decades, my activism informing Tyler's opportunities, created a lump in my throat. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Tyler assured me. Just thank you for showing me what's possible when you stand up for what matters. That evening, as I completed final preparations for Thanksgiving, I found myself reflecting on the circuitous path that had led us here. How a dismissive teenager's comment had initiated a journey of rediscovery. How secrets revealed had strengthened rather than damaged family bonds. How the very values I had feared might alienate my daughter had ultimately created a bridge to my grandson. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold, sunlight streaming through autumn leaves still clinging to the trees outside my windows. I rose early, savoring the quiet as I prepared the turkey and organized serving dishes. By the time my guests began arriving at noon, the condo was filled with the aromas of sage, roasting poultry, and the apple cranberry pie Jennifer had contributed. Diane and Helen arrived first, bearing flowers and wine, followed shortly by Manuel with homemade dinner rolls. Jennifer, Mark, and Lily appeared next, bringing side dishes and helping to arrange the expanded dining table I'd created by adding a folding table to my usual one. Tyler came last, rushing in with apologies about traffic and a slightly rumpled dress shirt. As we gathered around the table, academics, activists, family members, all now connected through threads of shared purpose and growing understanding, I felt a sense of integration I had not experienced since Thomas's death. These separate spheres of my existence were no longer compartmentalized but beautifully, messily intertwined. Mark, showing unexpected social grace, engaged Manuel in a thoughtful conversation about urban development that bridged their different political perspectives. Lily peppered Diane and Helen with questions about their experiences during the women's movement. Jennifer and Tyler moved easily between conversations, their newfound confidence evident in how they engaged with ideas and disagreements alike. When it came time for the traditional sharing of gratitudes before the meal, I listened as each person offered reflections ranging from the personal to the philosophical. When my turn came, I took a moment to look around the table, making eye contact with each beloved face. I'm grateful for second chances, I said simply, for the opportunity to reclaim parts of myself I thought were lost. For a family that has grown not just in acceptance but in genuine appreciation of difference, and for the reminder that it's never too late to live with authenticity and purpose. As murmurs of agreement circulated around the table, Mark cleared his throat. I'd like to add something, if I may. He looked uncharacteristically nervous, glancing first at Jennifer, who nodded encouragingly, and then at Tyler. I've spent a lot of my life valuing certainty over growth, security over authenticity. But watching all of you this past year, especially you, Eleanor, and you, Tyler, has challenged me to reconsider what really matters. He reached for his water glass, taking a sip before continuing. So, I want to say that I'm grateful for patient teachers, for family members who pushed me to think differently without giving up on me. And his voice grew firmer. I'm grateful that my son has been accepted to Berkeley with a scholarship that recognizes his leadership. I couldn't be prouder. Tyler's jaw dropped. Dad? How did you— Your mother told me this morning, Mark admitted. And while California is farther than I'd hoped, I can't think of a more fitting place for you to continue this journey you've begun, with your grandmother's legacy to inspire you. The tears that sprang to Tyler's eyes matched those I felt, gathering in my own. This gesture of support from Mark, this recognition of the value in a path so different from his own, represented perhaps the most profound transformation of all. Later, as our guests departed with leftovers and warm embraces, and Jennifer and Mark took Lily home for an early bedtime, Tyler lingered. We sat together in my living room, the dishes done, soft music playing in the background. This was the best Thanksgiving I can remember, he said, stretching his long legs before him. Everyone actually talked about real things instead of just sports and weather. I smiled. Real connection requires real conversation. Something your generation understands instinctively, I think. Maybe, he conceded, though I notice my friends often hide behind screens rather than risking face-to-face. Vulnerability. Every generation finds its own ways to connect and to avoid connection, I observed. The technologies change, but the human needs remain constant. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Tyler said, "Grandma, can I ask you something? Something I've been wondering since the summit?" "Of course. Do you think—" He hesitated, formulating his question carefully. "Do you think it's possible to maintain hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges? With climate change, with political polarization, with all the crises we're facing, how do you not give in to despair?" It was a profound question, one that deserved a thoughtful response. "I think hope isn't something you maintain," I said slowly. "It's something you practice, something you choose, again and again, even in the face of evidence that might justify despair." Tyler considered this. "But isn't that just denial? Choosing hope despite contrary evidence?" "Not at all," I assured him. "Hope isn't about ignoring reality. It's about recognizing that reality isn't fixed, that human agency matters, that collective action can create change in directions we can't always predict." "That's what I saw in those old photographs of you at protests," Tyler said. "People coming together despite the odds, despite powerful forces arrayed against them." "Exactly. And some of those movements succeeded beyond what seemed possible at the time. Others failed in their immediate goals but planted seeds that would bear fruit decades later." I reached for his hand. "The work of justice is never finished in one lifetime, Tyler. We each contribute what we can, then pass the baton to the next generation, who will see possibilities we couldn't imagine." He nodded slowly, absorbing this perspective. "I like that framing. It feels sustainable, less likely to lead to burnout." "Sustainability matters in activism as much as in ecology," I agreed. "Your generation seems to understand that better than mine did sometimes." As Tyler prepared to leave, gathering his coat and scarf against the November chill, he paused at my door. "You know, when I called you out of touch last year, it was the most ironic thing ever. Because you've helped me get in touch with what really matters. History, perspective, the long arc of change. I thought I knew everything, but you showed me how much I had to learn." "And you," I told him, "showed me how much I still had to give. How much of myself I'd been keeping hidden away." He embraced me tightly. This young man now several inches taller than me. His warmth and strength a physical manifestation of all he was becoming. "See you at the climate march on Saturday?" "Wouldn't miss it," I assured him. "I'll bring the extra granola bars. You bring the signs." After he left, I stood for a moment in my doorway, watching as he strode toward his car, his posture straight, his movements confident. Then I returned to my living room, to the table still adorned with autumn centerpieces, to the space now filled with conversations that had bridged generations, ideologies, experiences. My gaze fell on a framed photograph I'd recently added to my wall. Thomas in his prime, addressing a crowd at an anti-war rally, his face alight with passion and purpose. Beside it hung a newer image. Tyler at the climate summit, speaking at the press conference with that same expression of righteous determination. "You would love him so much," I whispered to Thomas's image. "He carries your fire, though he doesn't know it." And in that moment, I felt the circle complete itself. Past flowing into present, present reaching toward future, separate chapters of my life finally woven into a coherent whole. The journey from being called out of touch to finding deeper, Connection that I'd known in decades had transformed not just my relationship with my family, but my relationship with myself. The woman who had once compartmentalized her identity, activist, scholar, mother, widow, had reclaimed the integration that makes a life not just successful, but meaningful. And in doing so, had helped those she loved most find their own paths to authenticity and purpose. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Silver hair framing a face lined by decades of experience, eyes bright with the light of renewed engagement. "Hello, Eleanor," I said softly to my reflection. "All of you." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.